Who doesn't enjoy great Super Bowl commercials? Which one was the most memorable and why? I love that question. Love it, and it's relevant your students' lives. I'm sure 199% of your students were watching the Super Bowl, and even if they missed it, the commercials are replayed and replayed. So that's great. Love it. Let's do one more here before we move on. Reality is you must wear a mask each and every time you walk outside. What changes do we as future decision makers need to implement now to remedy this problem for the previous set of questions? I like this. That's really good. It's a great question. That is a great question. And it's gonna drive inquiry, and it's relevant, and that question right there really calls you to action as well. So that's great. You guys are gonna continue coming up with good questions, and I think I've liked these questions the most out of all, because I think it really, again, like Steve said before, it ties nicely to that dimension of the C3 framework of calling students to actions, and it gives the so what factor to your class. So what we're studying advertising, or so what we're studying the leaders of the past, or so what we're studying the explorers. Why is this relevant today? So what? So what am I going to do about it now? And I love these questions that you guys are coming up with. So let's look at some of the questions that we came up with as a team. For call to action, we could say, who are the leaders in our community, and how can we tell their stories? And I saw a similar to this on the Padlet. We could say, how can we create a guide for other kids so they will know how advertisers try to get us to buy our stuff? Okay. Now thinking about it, I like your Super Bowl idea much better in the Coke advertisement, but that's also a great question. And then third, how can we as explorers create a planning guide for leading an expedition? Okay, so all of these questions, and many of the ones that you came up with, call students to create something, to plan something, to research something, in order to have a higher cause. And I just want to make the point that the call to action type of questions, not only do they connect nicely to the C3 framework, but they connect very nicely with service learning. And we know that many schools and many classrooms are doing service learning and service learning projects, and also can have a great interdisciplinary tie. I can look at all three of these questions and not only connect them with the C3 framework and service learning, but teach them that learning happens across disciplines for our students, and life happens across disciplines, and that we're interdisciplinary as well. So one of the other things that you can do, and some of you already did that with your questions, is to go local with your questions. All right. So how could we help a small local business improve its advertising? That may be one way to get students to think about the local community and make it relevant for them. And then, should the city of Raleigh allow street artists to help gentrify the downtown area? Or, how do we design an exhibit on the Iroquois Nation for the North Carolina Museum of Natural History? So all of these questions certainly are going to still address your content standards, but they're going to always help students call to action and call something to action, or by going locally, it's also going to assist you in the availability of resources and letting the research lead the student in a local setting, and that can be quite exciting, not only for students but for you. Okay. Any questions at this point? I want to stop and go and take some of your questions that you may have before we move on.
Jason, Dr. Parker made a really good point that the call to action allows teachers to demonstrate their instruction is relevant to the students. And I think that's great point. Is again, you want your questions to be relevant to the kids. And we talked about this again and again. And the great thing about concept-based curriculum instruction, it really helps get to the fact and the idea that these things matter, and we're doing them for a reason. And so that's a great point, Jason, that call to action does allow teachers to show that their instruction is relevant to the students. And it's so important for effective instruction.
Okay, I see some other people are typing in some questions. I'm trying to. She had a question. Okay. All right. If any of you still have questions, continue to type those in. And again, we're going to. If anyone would like to be unmuted and be able to address their question verbally, if you'll just raise your hand and we can unmute you, and then you can also ask your question verbally. We want to come back to our focus question that we asked at the beginning of this webinar, and we hope that we've taken you through many different ways to craft an effective question, and how to sometimes when we are too specific or too standards based, sound too much like a teacher, or ask a question that can be Googled, how we can effectively change that question. So I want to go back to our knows and our need to knows that I asked at the beginning of this webinar, and I don't think anybody else posted any need to knows, but I do want to make sure that I addressed all of those that anyone may have. And this is exactly what we should be doing with our students as well. When we ask students a focused question or a question that's going to drive inquiry, we really do need to go through that need to know process with them. And every single thing they write down as a need to know in order to answer that question, we need to come back at the end and have this conversation and say, did we answer all of your need to knows? And so we certainly want to make sure that we did that, and again, make this a practice with your students as well. Just to conclude, and if some of you, like I said, have any questions, we certainly want to take those, but we know that effective questioning and using inquiry is very important in social studies in order to demonstrate how history is incomplete and is certainly open to interpretation. And over time, students are going to use facts as evidence rather than truth, and primary source document as raw evidence. And so if you would like more practice with crafting effective driving questions, or if you want to look at the resources or research that we have available, we're going to take you through some of those. You can certainly use the links that I'm going to show you, and like I said, this webinar will be archived so that you can come back here at any time and practice how to craft driving questions as you use inquiry in social studies. So let's take a look at a couple of those practice websites and resources. So if you need more practice driving questions, there's 3 websites here, and I'll just take you to one of them. Crafting the driving question. This is a website where it says, if you click down on the 3rd link, it says practice recognizing good driving questions. And then again, this is an interactive website. It gives you information, but it also lets you practice as well. STEM Champions, developing the driving question, is another great informational website, and will let you practice. And then the last one is from Buck Institute for crafting the driving question. And I just want to point out, while I'm on Buck Institute's site, much of the research and the resources that are on this webinar and that we've gathered comes from Buck Institute, and so they have a lot of resources here that will help you in designing effective driving questions to promote inquiry. I'm going to turn it over to Steve, and he is going to take it over.
Alright guys, just real quick I want to show you where you can find because Justin has a number of links that you can do too and are available. I just want to make sure you know where to find them on our wiki. If you go to our wiki and just click on the Social Studies webinar series and click on resources on inquiry and questioning under webinar 3, and you should get a document.
Oh, Lord, no.
And what we've done is we've go ahead and we've actually provided the links for you with short descriptions of each one. Every link that you see here in the PowerPoint is available on our wiki for you to explore on your own. I will say my personal favorite is the History Lab site. If you haven't seen that site, definitely encourage you to check that out. Just wanted to make sure you had a chance to see where you could find these resources if you want to look at them before we look at the PowerPoint up. Thanks for letting me take over here for a second, Justin. Back to you.
Okay, I think I'm back on. And thank you, Steve, for making that point. That was a really useful tool to show them and where to find the resources. The next thing that I want to show you, more resources for inquiry. Again, the Buck Institute already took you there and pointed out that much of the research and resources for this webinar came from the research that Buck Institute has done. This is another website. Actually, it's a PDF, I think. That looks at a project-based learning guide. Project-based learning and problem-based learning lend themselves nicely to inquiry. And in this guide, you'll find a lot of information about different types of inquiry, what inquiry should entail, and how to craft those questions that are going to lead to inquiry. So just wanted to take you there, and that's a 23-page document, so you can peruse that at your leisure. Another thing that we've referenced many times throughout this webinar is the C3 framework, and inquiry just ties in so nicely to the C3 framework here, and effective questioning again, and the call to action ties into all those dimensions of the C3 framework. And here's that interactive art that Steve showed you on the other side. And this is a 110-page document, so certainly peruse that at your leisure. But it is a good document, and it is the foundation for much of our work here in North Carolina and across the nation. Many new standards are being developed around the C3 framework, so it's definitely a good document to read when you have time, if you have not checked that out already. And then lastly, another resource is the History Lab, and this has lots of great videos, interactive templates that you can go to, and it helps you learn how to, again, help approach history through inquiry. And so I think you will find many great things here on this website as well. It's got links to other websites and links to other research that you will definitely find useful. Okay. We just certainly wanted to point out the research that we used for this PowerPoint, and we won't take you to all of that, but again, Book Institute, Edutopia, what the research says about inquiry and project-based learning in order to craft good, effective questions that promote and support inquiry in social studies. So we certainly wanted to show you that research and that body of research that we used. Okay.